Hey everyone, it is Shakira, aka the Dope Doula, and I'm so excited because today I am joined by someone who is a dear friend. We are in the same faith community and family. I have known this woman for, oh my gosh, like 10 years
Yeah.
now, which is insane. It doesn't feel that long, but it has been 10 years. And she is joining me for today's conversation. This is Mrs. Candace Essel. She is a wife, a mother, a brilliant, just brilliant thinker, entrepreneur. She is
Oh.
a pharmacist. She does so much, and she has been generous enough to lend her time to today's conversation. As you all know, we are in our How to Get Pregnant series, and I promise that as part of this conversation, we would talk about the different paths and journeys that some people have to take to get pregnant. Not everybody is able to get pregnant the traditional route. And so I'm so thankful to welcome Candace to this conversation, who's going to share a little bit about her IVF journey. Candace is a mom to two beautiful free Black children.
I love
And
it.
yeah, Candace, tell everybody a little bit about
Yeah.
yourself.
Thank you for that very nice introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. When Shakira called me, I jumped on the chance to just come and speak. So yeah, I have two little ones at home: a 4 year old Elizabeth, who we call Lizzie, and a 2 year old Kwame. And I'm in the thick of the new journey of parenthood, but had the untraditional path to get there. I'm married to Kofi Essel, who I met at church, and it's just been amazing to go on this kind of journey with him. And at the same time, we're just in the thick of the pandemic and raising kids and figuring out what the future is going to look like and hold for them. But excited to share and answer questions and just be a part of this just series, because I think it's so important, especially in our community, to have these conversations. So thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Of course, of course. So before all of that, I mean, I know we had a chance to talk
Yeah,
before this, but I'm sure people want to know how you and
sure.
your family are doing in light of the
Yeah.
pandemic.
Yeah, so we are really holding up really well. Our children have been in daycare during most of this. Our daycare has taken additional like health precautions, but for the most part, we've been doing great. Kofi and I are both in the medical field. As Shakira said, I'm a pharmacist and he's a pediatrician in DC. And so we kind of see the worst of the worst, but we also see the hopeful stories. We hear, the successes. And so we're able to kind of balance that with everyday life. So we've been hanging in there, still, quarantining, wearing our masks, doing the things that we need to do to keep not just ourselves safe, but, everyone we interact with on a day-to-day basis. But we're doing good.
Good. That makes me really happy to hear. And I can only imagine how big the kids are getting now.
Yes.
Candace and I normally are able to see each other in
Yeah.
church on Sunday or, other events that we would both be at
Yeah.
different points of the month and throughout the year. And I haven't seen you since last year.
Yeah. 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 It's been a while. Yeah.
Which is insane. But let's jump into our conversation. So Candace, you know that a
Mhm.
part of this series is really thinking about, for a lot of people, the concept of getting pregnant seems very easy and intuitive. Most people think that, like, oh, you have sex and then you
Yep.
get pregnant. Was that your understanding? Like, what was your relationship to getting pregnant?
Of course, mine. I'm from the South, so a little background. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. So outside of that typical, and I know some people don't even have that conversation with mom about the birds and the bees. You don't do this with a boy because that can get you pregnant. I just thought like, okay, well, when the time comes for me to want to get pregnant, I just need to have sex, and boom, bam, and it may not happen the first month, and I kind of look back and giggle because my mother, um she obviously has me, and I have a younger sister. She's like, oh, I'm a fertile myrtle, so like don't even try to like try unless you're ready, because I like got pregnant the first month I tried with you. So I'm like, you know, okay, great. Genetics is in my favor. This isn't going to be an issue. I'm just going to, you know, when we decide to like, you know, turn off the light and I get off of birth control, then it's just going to happen in a couple of months.
Yeah. And I think that is so interesting, right? Because usually our first introduction to the concept of sex in most cases comes from our parents or a
Yep.
caregiver. For a lot of people, unfortunately, that's not always a good and safe introduction.
Right.
There can be a lot of trauma associated with like how we think about sex and you know, our own reproductive embodiment. And yeah, the stories that get passed on, this is especially true, I think, in a lot of like Black and Indigenous and Hispanic communities, that it's just like it goes from don't have sex when
Yep.
you're unmarried or unpartnered to then when are you going to have a baby, and like there's nothing
In
that
between. Yeah.
that fills the
Yeah.
gap. Was that like, how did you reconcile that?
Totally. I mean, you know, Kofi and I got married. We didn't necessarily want to start trying right away. He was in residency, and we were just trying to like kind of, you know, get our bearings on being married, because not that that isn't a huge transition, you know, that's a huge transition. So, but you know, of course, you know, a year into it, it's like, well, when are y'all gonna have kids? Oh, well, you know, you're past 30, so
Oh
you know,
wow.
you need, so it's all that pressure. And then, you know, naturally, because I was 30, 31 around that time. And so, you know, my friends who had either been married before or just who had kids younger all had kids around me. And so it's like, okay, we went through the wave of engagements, we went through the wave of marriages, and now we're going through the wave of like babies. And so, like, it very much was this transition of like, you know, waiting, waiting, waiting. Okay, the switch is on now. Now you need to go and make babies. And so that was kind of for me. I mean, we eventually got to the point where yes, we decided we wanted to start our family. But looking back on it, I was still very much in the midst of even finding out who Candace Essel was, because for 30 years I had been Candace Farley, you know, and
Right.
so that's a whole nother, you know, story and situation of like,
Yeah.
well, how does Candace Essel even respond to like motherhood, because I'm functioning through that lens now. So
Right.
just very different and interesting, but yeah.
Yeah. And so you mentioned at the top of this conversation that you and your husband took a different path.
Yes.
What was that path for you all?
So I'll make this story kind of as short as I can. But when we made the decision to start trying to build our family, I would say about a year and a half in, I obviously still hadn't gotten pregnant. And, you know, the question started going through like, what is causing it? And so we immediately started thinking like, well, must be something wrong with me, Candace. Like, you know, so I'm going through all these checkups at my doctor's office. Everything's coming back okay. I pretty much have been, I will say, blessed in the sense that I've had a pretty regular menstrual cycle throughout my, not that that's an indicator of how you can get
Right.
pregnant or anything. So I don't want to put that myth out there. But in my mind, I'm thinking like, okay, well, everything's been normal. So like, what is wrong with me? And it's month after month, we're not getting pregnant month after month. And so eventually, out of the blue, maybe at the 18, 20-month mark, my husband rolls over to me and is like, you know, when I was younger, I was diagnosed as having a varicocele. I don't know what a varicocele is, you know. So I'm like, okay. And so he's like, I know that they can cause fertility issues. So then again, to shorten the story, that started a whole process of us looking into that. He went to see a urologist, and we found out that he had a double varicocele. And so to put that in layman's terms really quickly, that means that the tubes that men have, you know, in their testicles that lead to the penis, that, you know, go through the sperm, the semen, all those things, his, instead of being straight lines or straight tubes, were all bundled and mixed together.
Wow.
And so when that happens, naturally you have a harder time for semen and sperm to get to where it needs to go. Not only
Yeah.
that, it causes them to sit in buckets and pool, so then they're not great quality, and it
Gotcha.
also decreases the amount. So it was like a double whammy. So we were, 2 years into our marriage, sitting across from a doctor who, I'll never forget those words, was like, yeah, the chances of you all getting pregnant the conventional route are slim to none.
Wow.
We're like, okay. So I remember going for brunch after that and being like, well, how do we navigate this? Like, we want to start a family. So we started looking into fertility clinics. By the grace of God, I was employed with an organization at the time who, because they're in the state of Maryland, was required to offer some coverage through our insurance for fertility treatment. So we made an appointment at the fertility clinic, and at the first meeting, they were like, yep, you guys will have to go through the process of IVF. And so that, and Shakira, tell me how much you want me to share.
I want to unpack because you just
great.
said so much, and I know people watching are going to be like, first of all, what is that? Second of all, but I want to start with something that you said. You said, you immediately thought that there was something wrong with you.
Yes.
And when I think when we consider infertility, most people commonly associate infertility with women or people who have a uterus. And we don't even talk about male infertility at all. And so when you all came to that realization, like, what was that conversation like?
Oh man, it was really, because this whole time, and when I say it wasn't anything that Kofi was saying, it wasn't anything, but it was almost like this immediate assumption, even to myself, that like, I'm not doing something right. I'm either not eating correctly. I'm not like being stress-free enough. I'm not, checking my ovulation. I've read up on all the books of like what I'm supposed to be doing, how I'm supposed to be doing it. We're getting special things for me to eat. We're taking my temperature. We're doing all the right things to make sure I'm ovulating. So it's this complete focus on me. And then, as the woman, I think there's this also unfair assumption that like, well, then the burden of conception is on you. And so never crossed my mind until that night that there could be something not necessarily wrong, but the issue of fertility could lie with him. It was never had even the thought that, it was me sitting there crying. I need to, figure this out. I can't get it together. I can't. And I mean, then when it did come out, like, oh my goodness. And then I started finding the community of like, yeah, that was our story too. Yep, that was our story too. And I'm like, since that time, I can say in my close circle of friends, I know personally of at least 5 families where that has been the issue. But who talks about that?
No one.
Stories, you hear the stories of people with like, or women, I should say, with, different disease states or, even traumatic events happening to where they don't have a fallopian tube or whatever the case is. But like, you rarely hear the stories of like men infertility. And it blew my mind.
I'm blown away, and I can only imagine like that moment of revelation both being freeing for you, but then how, and far be it for you to speak for your husband, but how did he receive that news?
And I think, we laugh about this now. And at the moment, I don't know that we laughed, but it was almost, as I shared before, my husband's a pediatrician. So this is somebody who's been to med school. But even he didn't necessarily, it wasn't until, like I said, we were probably at month 18 or 20 of trying to conceive, where he was like, wait, I vaguely remember this doctor telling me this, but had not, at the time that he was told, it was because he was having like pain in his growing, but he was also playing basketball at the time. So there's multiple factors that he's looked. So, that was decades ago. And so now to think that is now affecting his, or being something that needs to be discussed in his marriage, it just didn't cross his mind. He said it literally came to him like kind of in his sleep, like, oh, remember that doctor told you that you have a variable.
Wow.
And since he wasn't trying to create a family in between that time, again,
Right.
never came up as an issue.
But what's so
Um,
interesting about that, Candace, is I'm sure you and your husband were having conversations with your
yep.
medical care providers, and the fact that in almost 2 years,
Yeah.
they never directed you to
No,
consider that.
no, not at all. I will say though, for those who have to go the route of a fertility clinic in any form, they are worth their weight in gold if they don't start an assessment with both of you. I think that's a red flag for them to only assume that, like, we need to do tests on you, you need to do tests on, as the woman. I think, I applaud the clinic that we use, and I applaud the ones that we even kind of had consultations with, that they immediately started with, you all both need to come in for an assessment.
Okay.
So I think, to those who are considering that route, make sure that that is the way that they approach it, and not this assumption that, like, okay, well, let's come and just do your blood work. No, both of you all should be in to do blood work. Both of you all should be in to do an examination, or at least, in Kofi's case, he was referred out to a urologist, which is also appropriate. But just that there is a means of, checking his baseline and his status for things as well is very important.
Yeah, we're definitely going to come back to some recommendations and
Okay.
insights, because I know there are people who are probably taking notes, like I want to like know what steps I would need to
Yeah.
take. But first, before we get there, like you did IVF. For people
Yes.
who don't know what IVF is, can you tell them what is IVF?
So IVF is intravenous fertilization. And so what that means is that there is a scientific means of reproducing the fertilization process of egg and sperm. So this is a process where typically a woman's egg is taken out, and then there is a means of introduction outside of the body with the sperm. And so they allow for, so there's also different levels to it. So that is the most basic. There's also something called IUI, which is where the egg never leaves the body, but the
Mm.
sperm is just introduced directly into the egg. But in my case with IVF, the egg actually comes out, and so does the sperm, and they are joined outside of both bodies.
Okay.
I also had another process which is called ICSI, ICIS, and I will not pretend to remember what that stands for.
We'll put it in the captions.
Yes. And that process is, again, because my husband's sperm was what they classify as being low motility, so it did not move at the speed that it should. It had poor, and I'm going to butcher this word, it has to do with the morphology of how the sperm looks.
Morphs.
So
Okay.
it should look a certain way. His looked what we termed ugly.
Okay.
And then he also had low count, so low sperm count. So, again, today we can joke that, he didn't have many, they were slow, and they were ugly. But because of that, it automatically qualified us for the ICSI process, which is where not only do they take the egg out and join it with the sperm, before they join it with the sperm, they actually clean the sperm.
Oh,
So
wow.
they remove all of the ones that don't look as nice, that aren't as, that don't have that vitality, that look like they're active, that look like they're going to be able to actually fertilize the egg. And then they pick out one and they actually insert it to the egg.
Yeah.
Versus just the introduction, which you have in typical IVF, and they let, kind of the sperm do its natural thing. So that was the actual process we had. And so, yeah, that's that. I mean, there's a whole lot with IVF of egg harvesting and everything. So yes.
And it took time, right? Because you shared, I think, was it with your second, with Kwame, that like you had a photo on Instagram with all the needles that you were having to stick yourself with to get pregnant. And I think that's another thing people don't realize, even if when you take assisted measures to pregnancy, again, it's not an immediate process, and it's not guaranteed. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Just thinking about that, I'm thinking we didn't share with a lot of family, especially for Lizzie. I think that for me, that was just about wanting to manage my own emotions in that moment and not really having space to manage others' emotions. And so just kind of keeping that just very, very tight knit family, and like one group of friends knew kind
Yeah.
of the process. But anyway, I say that to say I had probably looking back, a well-meaning friend when we did share, more about our IVF journey. It was like, oh, well, you took the easy way out. And
Oh,
I'm like, girl, it was not easy.
oh, wow.
And I don't think she meant the words to be hurtful. I think it's just, just not a lot of information about what that process looks like. So
Yeah.
IVF, you have to think you are giving your body hormones to basically replicate what would happen naturally. So leading up to well before we even get the egg and the sperm, I had to trick my body into
Mm.
basically over ovulating. And the way to do that is to basically pump yourself full of all these different hormones through
Yep.
medicine. So there was, multiple injections a day. There were vaginal suppositories of estrogen that you're going through. There's a trigger shot to release the eggs. There's, blood work that I was getting, on a weekly basis. And then at some points every 48 hours. And so you can imagine someone who, I'm also working, having to explain to my boss, like, okay, every day this week or every other day this week, I'm going to be like an hour late to work because I'm rushing to a clinic to get blood
Right.
done and rushing back to work. And so, there's just so much, then, that's just the 12 weeks leading up to it. Then you have the actual procedure where you have the egg and, well, in our case, an embryo, because at that point our egg and sperm had met and had formed an embryo, implanted back into you. Then there's another 12-day wait period to see if said embryo implants into you. So, it is taxing both emotionally, physically,
Yeah. Oh,
financially.
yeah.
Um, so for anybody thinking this route is an easy check, because of, I think, sometimes how it's glamorized with like celebrities, and sometimes
Hmm.
even in the same way that surrogacy is like glamorized in the media, it is not an easy process.
Yeah.
So I don't know of any woman that says, yes, that's what I knew exactly when I would, this is the route I knew I wanted to do to become a mother. I think, we're thankful for the routes we have, but it is a very difficult journey.
Yeah, and there's an aspect of that that you reference in addition to the emotional and physical expense of it.
Yeah,
IVF is very expensive. I
very
don't
expensive.
Would you be willing to share like
Yeah.
what did that look like for
So
you?
I love sharing this piece about it too, because it's very interesting. So the first time we went to the fertility clinic, they told us roughly a rough estimate of one round, one try, whether it's successful or not, would be around $12,000. And you can just imagine 12 grand to start your family, not even a guarantee. This is just to
Yeah.
try to start your family. And Kobe and I, like I said before, he's finishing up residency, about to go into fellowship. We're renting a townhouse. We have aspirations to buy a home. And it was a very real conversation of like, we can take the money we've saved over these years and buy a home, or we
Yeah.
can start a family.
Yeah.
It's one or the other. Um, and again, I go back to, until something affects you, sometimes you don't know the impact of it. We went in and had that appointment in April. I want to say sometime in May or June, I forget the month exactly, President Obama signed a bill legalizing same sex marriage. With that bill, it also provided a means for couples who, same sex couples, to be able to qualify for measures of using the same benefits of fertility treatment options if it's covered through an insurance. Because the other thing my insurance company told me was that just because you've been trying for now probably a little over 2 years, it's not been documented. Because you only came to our clinic
Right.
this time. So this is when the documentation, and because you're a heterosexual couple, you have to wait 2 years before we can officially cover you, after you've officially started trying, before we'll cover any portion of the payments. But when that happened, guess what? Everybody's now covered. So the lady called me back from the finance. She was like, "Oh my goodness, did you hear the great news? Like, you can actually come in next month and start trying." And I'm like, "Oh, really? Okay." She's like, "Yeah, with the passage of this new law, it like allows us to open up our financial um ability to serve same-sex couples, and so as a means of being able to serve them in this capacity, we also can't, discriminate against heterosexual couples. And so now that same like offer is open to you." And we were like, wow, never in a million years would I think that that would impact me in such a
Yeah.
great way, but it really did. It opened up the door for us to be able to start our family 2 years sooner than what we probably would have been able to.
That's one, amazing. And two, I mean, all in, you're looking at the time that you've
Yeah,
invested in terms of work and, the emotional taxing
yeah.
on your body. So like when you calculate all of that, what was the time between when you started before you actually got a viable embryo that then became your beautiful children for each one?
So for Lizzie, who's our first, the process was a little shorter only because once we did the egg harvesting, we did what we called a fresh transfer. So my egg wasn't frozen.
Okay.
So I would say from consult day to egg implantation day was a little over 6 months.
Okay.
And then of course, once we implanted, which is not a typical story,
Yeah.
she took that embryo took and produced Lizzie.
Okay.
Kwame was a different story. Actually, in between Lizzie and Kwame, we had a cycle of IVF that wasn't successful, which people don't talk about that either.
Exactly.
Um, and really struggling even to find a place like, is this a loss?
Mm.
Can I feel that this is a loss? And really grappling with like, this is a loss. I
Yeah.
wanted this, embryo to implant. I prepared for it like I had prepared with Lizzie. So months of shots, we're talking 12 weeks of shots and preparing for this day, having it, waiting, and then finding out, nope, didn't implant you. And so cycling through that. So my two kids are about a little over 2.5 years apart.
Yeah.
And so then after that, taking some time to let my body rest, let me kind of regroup myself before we tried again with Kwame. And Kwame was coming from frozen eggs. So his process was different than Lizzie's as far as what you have to prepare your body for. So yeah, so I guess from when we made the decision to start, it was that, 12-week period of getting the body ready. And then we implanted the frozen egg that's
Wow. I just salute you for your bravery and I honor that loss. A loss is a loss, no
yeah, it
matter
is.
what it looks like. And I just want to hold space for that and honor
Yeah.
that. And just acknowledge that, another thing that people don't share is how brave it is to go through
Yeah.
this process, in addition to all the expenses that we just talked about. But, like,
Yeah.
this is a different way of going about it, and that
Yeah.
requires a different element of hope and faith
Mhm.
that, if it doesn't work out for you, what does that do to your
Yeah.
psyche and to
Yeah.
your mental well-being? My goodness. So thank you for your bravery in sharing this story, but also thank you for your bravery in going through that journey. You, throughout this conversation, have given so many gems, and I want to capture those for
Mhm.
everybody listening. One of which was, in the process of, your journey to getting pregnant, taking a look at both you and your partner,
Mhm.
and not automatically defaulting the responsibility of conception or the process of getting ready for conception to the woman or to the person with the
Exactly.
uterus. And that's something that I've been trying to communicate through this series, is that, getting pregnant doesn't start the moment of sex. There is a
Mhm.
process before that, and both
Yes.
parties, if people are choosing to conceive with a partner are responsible for what they bring to that process of conception. So I really want people to capture that. And
Absolutely.
for any of the women listening in, if you are in a heterosexual relationship, having these conversations with your partner, like, what does your health history look like?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, are you taking care of yourself? Are there any genetic things in your family that you can recall that might impact our ability to get pregnant?
Yeah.
Another thing you said was relying on a medical care provider that's going to guide you in that way and
Yeah.
not put that burden on one party, but really bringing both people into the conversation,
Yeah.
which I think is really important, to just have a trusted medical care provider
Yeah.
as you go through this process. And we could talk about that as well, like what your
Yeah.
relationship was with your fertility clinic. So, do you want to just share a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
So, I mean, I'm so glad you brought that up because you're reminding me of things that I kind of forgot that I had done. But yeah, just as you would research and look into an OB, a gynecologist, your primary care doctor, do your research in this too. It was very important for me to have someone, at least on the team, who I felt like could empathize with the situation.
Mm,
So, my particular fertility doctor was very open about sharing her own process. She actually
mm,
had gone through IVF with her second child. And openly, has that as her bio on her, page at the fertility clinic. And I felt like for me, that was really important because in those moments, like when we did not have a successful cycle, she did not dismiss it and say, like, oh, well, come back next month, we'll try it again. It was very much that. And she kind of helped me to even be like, take this, what you're feeling now is truly
mm.
a loss.
It is a
You had
loss.
hope, you had, desires, you had, so this is truly a loss. And so I think it's really important to build a team of doctors around you that support that. And I think it's important to research your doctor's views on certain things related to IVF. While they may be specialized in this area, they also differ in their approach to how they perform the procedure.
Mm,
There were some doctors in the practice that, once they take eggs out, they let them sit and mature for 3 days versus 5 days versus, so there's just differences. And you want to know that because if there's certain things that you would like to see in your process, at least being able to ask those questions. And I just really applauded my particular doctor and just that team at that fertility clinic of just really being very transparent and open. I never felt like, I had a silly question or she felt like, there was a question that I felt like was dismissed. I,
mm.
I felt like they did a very, very good job of, explaining things. So, yes, do your homework on that.
That's awesome. Thank you, Candace. And then the other thing that you said, which was related to your interpersonal relationships and the
Mhm.
decision for you, at least the
Yeah.
first round, to keep that, just between you and
Hmm.
your husband and keep that close to the chest. Can
Yeah.
you say more about why you made that decision?
Yeah. So I think it kind of we went through some highs and lows, right? So we were like, oh wow, we can't get pregnant the traditional route, to high, okay, IVF's an option, insurance will pay for it, to wait, we gotta wait 2 years before we can exercise, to whoa, nope, they just passed a new law. So we had kind of been on what I felt like was a kind of emotional roller coaster, which even if you didn't have those things in the picture, just the fact that you're having to go through an assisted process to get pregnant, I think lends itself to its own emotional roller coaster. And for me, it was really about managing my level of hope, my level of expectation, my husband's, and managing that almost internally first before we could let outsiders know and be able to. So my mother, God bless her soul, I love her to death, but I know she can go from 0 to 100. And so if I'm managing myself
Yeah.
in that moment, I can't also manage then if she goes from 0 to 100 about an event. And one thing I will tell people with IVF or going through the process or thinking about it is, you to a certain point will almost get what may feel like too much information. And what I
Mm,
mean by that is that friends who I've walked through the joys of getting pregnant, I always tell the story. I've never had a positive home pregnancy test, never in my life.
Mhm.
I always find out I'm pregnant by some nurse calling my phone from the fertility clinic and saying, "Congratulations." You know, um, so I've never experienced that piece of like, you know, having this moment maybe in the comfort of your bathroom or something and sharing it with your partner or however that
Yeah.
process is. And so then after they have that, after that experience, then you usually wait like 6 weeks or something before you go to the doctor. That doesn't happen with IVF. You literally get this phone call. I can tell you the day and the time and the place where each one of these phone calls where they say, congratulations, your level today is 400. And you're like, is that good? Is that bad? And they're like, yes, that's good. You're pregnant. And so you're super excited. And they're like, all right, come back in 48 hours for your next blood test to see if it doubled. So you go back in 48 hours. So you never have that period of like, which I think can be good and bad for some people of like,
Yeah.
okay, is everything on it? I'm just going with the flow. Every 48 hours if it's a good or if it's bad. So you
Yeah.
get this. So it's almost this overload of information to where I felt like sometimes I just had so much to process.
Mm.
I needed to keep that kind of between me and my partner.
Yeah, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. And, people choose to share what they feel most comfortable sharing. And I hope that hearing Candace's perspective, that'll offer a different, maybe, way of going about how much you
Yeah.
share and when and with who.
Yeah.
I have just a couple more
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
One, I'm just really curious because you said something a moment ago about, people take a pregnancy test at home, and that
Mhm.
creates then this relationship, a different relationship with your body. You got a
Yeah.
phone call and your
Yeah.
pregnancy experience was at first out of body. So what is
Yeah.
that relationship with your body like when you're going through IVF?
Oh, wow. Um, so I think, like I said, leading up, you're getting your body prepared and ready, right? So there was a part of me that because the quote unquote natural process wasn't happening, that I was having to trick my body into
Right.
believing it's pregnant so that
Mm.
when we actually implant this embryo, it will treat it as such. So there was almost this place, and again, I think this journey is very different depending on, in my mind, I also know that there is this part of my body that maybe could have done this, but because of, the male infertility, we're at this place and it's like, wow, I'm having to subject my body to these, hormones to grow our family, and just the sacrifice that comes with that, the mood
Mm.
swings, the actual discomfort and the pain,
Wow.
and it was almost like while I never felt there was a moment like this is unfair, it was like, wow, this is truly a journey to parenthood. And
Yeah.
because everybody's journey is so different, I think for me, um it just gave me a different lens of appreciation for my kids, that not to say that I wouldn't have, or that other people,
Yeah.
but it's just a different level of like, man, we really worked our butt off to get you.
We really wanted
We
y'all.
really wanted you guys. And I think for my own body, it gave me this sense of like, wow, like you can, this body can endure a lot. Like it
Mm.
has been through hundreds of injections,
Wow.
hundreds of blood draws, hormones going up and down and up and down. Yeah. And so it just really made me feel like almost a sense of power of like just being able to battle through it all.
That is so powerful. That sacrifice that people
Yeah.
who carry children make
Yeah.
on top of all of the the pre-work that you had to do.
Yeah.
You actually got us to where I wanted to go, bringing this conversation full circle. You said, you really, really wanted your children,
Yeah.
which I know that you did, obviously. And I'm curious, will you, when they're old enough to understand, share that they were conceived in this way?
Absolutely. And I think, that's everybody's choice. I think because we're a family of science backgrounds and medicine, I don't ever want to downplay that piece of their story,
Mhm.
because it is a piece of their story. It's a piece of, why we tried so hard, why we, mom and dad have, are so just thankful for them, and a sense of gratitude. So yeah, we have every plans of sharing that story, and also because we want them to know that, you touched on it at the beginning, you and I share the same faith family, but we as a family don't like to look at faith and science as being separate. They complement each other in our
Sure.
house. This
Yeah.
is for our house.
Our house
um,
too.
so we believe that God has given these doctors the wisdom to be able to think of these procedures and process, and that God's hand is in the midst of all of this. So we never like to say it's one or the other, but again, that they are both working together to get you here. And so mommy is very, very thankful for God for, blessing us with you. And at the same time, she's very thankful for the doctors who had the wisdom and that God has given them to be able to think of this process that allowed us to grow our family the way we wanted to.
That's
So yeah, we
that's
definitely.
amazing. Candace, thank you so much. I am
Welcome.
like, I know this conversation is going to be so edifying and helpful to so many. You also have just launched an incredible new project. So tell people where they can
Yeah.
find you.
Awesome. Thank you for the plug. So, my bestie and I, Karen Curtis, we just launched a business called Joy Evoked, and you can find us on Instagram. We have a website, www.joyevoked.com. We specialize in gift giving. So one of my love languages is gifts. And so I love to give gifts. And we are curating special gifts for people for various holidays. So yes, if you are looking for a fun gift, even for the holidays, come check us out.
Yeah, so go to Joy Evoked. And Candace, thank you so much.
Thank
I'm so
you.
grateful. Please kiss those beautiful